Hello. I have another video that I'm trying to record here, and there are lawn mowers outside. But I hope you can still hear what I'm saying anyway, because this is an important video, and I have limited time and privacy to record my videos, as you may know. Okay, but anyway, the topic of today's video is consent. I want to talk about consent. Synonyms include, agreement and getting somebody's permission. You know what I mean? Now, in human society, at least in English, we call having sex with somebody without their permission or consent, we call that rape. So, I want to talk about consent and how important it is for people to consent or agree to things in society in general. And I feel like nobody respects consent. People talk about consent in the context of sex and rape, and that's a huge problem, of course, for anybody who's been raped. However, I want to talk about consent in more than just that context. Things are done to us all the time without our permission. Okay, so let's start from conception. We do not choose for our parents to have sex and make that sperm meet that egg. Anybody who's here, that means their parents had sex, and as you probably know, if you follow my channel, I'm very pissed at my parents for doing that. But it doesn't end there. No, that's just the beginning. Our parents get to choose our name for us, our legal name. They get to choose whether or not we're circumcised. If you're a male, then your parents choose whether or not you get your foreskin cut off. And that is another violation of consent. And that is partly why you've probably heard of intactivists who talk about circumcision and how it's a violation of consent of the child because the child doesn't get to choose whether you cut off part of their body or not. And while personally I'm not upset about the fact that I was circumcised, because it hasn't caused me any major problems in life. I have other medical problems that are not related to the circumcision. But the fact that it's a violation of consent, that the baby cannot consent to that, is a problem. And that's why I do share posts by intactivists who bring awareness to that issue. And I do think parents should let their children decide. And obviously they can't decide when they're a baby. I feel like anybody who wants to get circumcised can do that as an adult later in life. I see no reason why we can't have men, when they're adults, if they decide they want to be circumcised, do that later. And yes, I know it would be painful if they did. But anyway, I don't want to get off topic. But the point is, I feel like, as a general rule, I respect consent. And I don't think anybody should do anything to somebody's body without their permission. Unfortunately, this is done all the time. Now, here's where it gets really creepy and where it gets really weird and scary, is in regards to the abortion debate. Now, here's the thing. Now, some people are so extreme with consent that, and I know the pro-choice argument. The pro-choice argument is that a woman has a right to her bodily autonomy and that nothing should be done to her body without her consent. And this means that people have a right to their own body to such a degree that women have the right to murder their unborn child. And that's where the abortion thing comes in. And here's the problem. I feel like on this issue of consent and bodily autonomy, people are misunderstanding things. Yes, it's it's like true. The whole difference between the pro-choice and the pro-life people is that, yes, I mean, I would agree as a pro-life person that it is, like a woman should have control over her own body. But the problem is that, see, pro-life people view the unborn child as a person who should have their own right to consent too, and their bodily autonomy. So here's the issue, is that it's a lose-lose situation. Because if the woman aborts, then they're violating the right to life and the consent of that child. But at the same time, there's the issue that the child didn't consent to be conceived in the first place. And I do not want to stay on this topic of abortion, but the issue of consent and bodily autonomy, which is pretty much the same thing in my opinion, is heavily related to the abortion issue. And here's the thing, it doesn't end there. Violations of consent range far beyond just the fact that we were conceived and our parents naming us and circumcising us or aborting us. All these things none of us get to choose. No, then it gets into the vaccine issue. Okay, the vaccines. Babies are injected with viruses which were produced through animal testing, and there are animal ingredients in them. So in other words, you're violating the consent of those non-human animals when you produce the vaccines in the first place. And then you're violating the consent of these human children who don't get to choose whether or not somebody injects viruses into them. And as far as the safety of vaccines and whether vaccines actually do save human lives and make people live longer or whether they kill them is irrelevant. It's completely irrelevant because you're already violating consent. And the topic of this video is consent, not about who lives or dies and the safety of vaccines. I've spoken about that topic separately. Oh, but it gets even worse than that. Yes, it gets worse. Your parents choose for you everything. What they will teach you, what religion they will teach you, what school you go to. Although actually the government forces people to go to public school anymore. And that's the thing. So we don't get to choose whether we go to school. We don't get to choose what we're taught by our parents or school teachers. We don't get to choose any of that. And here's what I think is ultimately the worst part. All of the things I mentioned before are horrible violations of consent. But it gets even worse than that. Your parents, up until you are either an adult or a teenager but able to work a job and making your own money and buying your own food, your parents choose for you what you will eat. And here's the thing, is I feel like parents, I think they feed their kids, most of them I think are trying to feed their kids healthy. I think they're trying to do good. Obviously, the parents are put in this position where they have to choose all these things for their children because the children can't do their own grocery shopping with their own money. So it's a necessity of society that, yes, parents have to choose what children eat. But the problem is, that means that there's the whole vegan versus carnist issue. I mean, not only does the child not get to choose what they're eating, but almost everybody grew up being fed meat, dairy, eggs, and honey, and who knows what other animal products are out there. So in other words, they're violating the consent of the non-human animals again to feed their human children, as well as themselves, of course. So there's so much violation of consent. Nobody those non-human animals don't choose to be murdered or raped, and the human children don't get a choice in anything. It's like until they're 18 or until they are able to work such a job that they can move out. And I'm 31 and I still haven't been able to move out in my own apartment, which I'm working on it. But I need a much higher income, and it's complicated. And the day will come. But this isn't about me. This is actually about how our society violates consent all the time. And quite honestly, I think it's a horrible thing. I think it's a horrible thing that none of us get a choice in any of these things. We don't consent to these things. Now, this is all leading up to a big point. When I've talked in the past with my co-hosts on the Free Will, Science, and Religion podcast, I've talked about how none of us have free will. And people argue that their libertarianism, compatibilism, determinism, all this weird stuff. But look, if you followed me up until this moment in this video, and you've realized that all of these violations of consent, all of these things that were done to us, our very existence, what vaccines we got, what we were taught in school, what we've been fed for the first part of our lives, all of these things we don't get any choice in. So, how do you have free will? Answer me that. How do you have a choice in who you are and what you do when every little thing you do is shaped by your experiences? And let me tell you, to this day, I still suffer horrible trauma from things that happened to me in my childhood. And people suffer for the rest of their lives, but by abuse in their past. And a big part of the suffering for me, though, is also the religion side of it. And that's part of why I have such a hatred of Christianity, because it screwed me up so bad, the fear of hell and all that. But I've spoken about that in other videos. But the point here is that I and many other adults are psychologically screwed up because all these things were done to us, to our bodies directly, whether through food or vaccines or circumcision or whatever else the case might be. All these things were done to us without a choice. And to act as if we can be responsible for our actions and deserve praise or blame for them is nuts. So here's the thing. Now, I'm an adult and I'm finding my own identity now. I'm trying. I'm very confused. But the point is, everything I am doing today, everything I am doing in my life as an adult, there is a cause. Identifiable causes. Every opinion I have, the fact that I'm an atheist and a vegan and a trans woman and all of these things, every other thing about me that there is, I can point to something in my childhood and tell you, because of these experiences and what I was taught here and then what I learned later, that's why I'm this way. And so I know that people know, for example, that being gay or transgender is not a choice. People are generally agree to that, but I wish that people would see that nothing is really a choice, because everything we do is an effect of the fact that our parents created us, and then we were taught all this horrible brainwashing throughout our childhood. And then we become adults and we are expected to work jobs and pay taxes. And then we have to do all this stuff that society demands us to, and we don't get a choice in. So that's the truth. And that's why people are angry a lot. And why do you think so many people commit suicide? Because life is shitty. Life is depressing. Okay? And look, I'm trying to stay positive. I'm really trying to stay positive and live a happy life. But unfortunately, I'm a psychologically screwed up mess. Nobody needs to tell me that I'm mentally ill, okay? Nobody needs to tell me that. I know that, okay? I know that people think that I'm mentally ill for being an atheist or even being a vegan or being transgender or whatever. But look, I know I'm psychologically screwed up. And you know what? So are you. And don't you deny it, because if you deny that you also are a psychologically screwed up mess, then you are a liar. None of us have a perfect life, and we all have our pain. We all have our suffering. It should be obvious. And I do hope I made my point clear by now that none of us get a choice in anything, and our consent has been violated probably more times than we can count. I hope this video made sense to somebody, and I hope that I achieve the happiness in my life that I'm looking for before I die. Okay? And I hope you do too. I wish myself and everyone else in the world well. And that's really all I have to say. And I've been thinking about recording this video for a long time, and I hope I've said it all. Goodbye.